So hi everyone, thanks for joining us this morning. As you know, we've put this series of expert sessions on to support you ever ongoing, unusual time, and we hope that you find today's session helpful for you and others that you attend as a mountaineering professional. If we just go through the next slide, which is about the housekeeping. Many of you have been, to hundreds of Zoom sessions before. It is helpful for us that just one or two people who haven't added the surname, and sometimes we get a few people with the same Christian name, and when we're looking back, we're not quite sure who that is. So can you make sure that everybody's put their surname? So if you go to the top of your video, and you should see 3 dots, and if you click on that, go down to rename, click on that, and then if you can just add the surname, that's really helpful for us. Thank you. So probably while a couple of people are doing that, just in terms of other, if I say housekeeping, there's a little bit of interactivity today. So again, if you are watching from a phone, a mobile phone, that may slightly impact on the quality of this session for you. The other thing is, Jamie's been doing some research at master's level, and we will make sure that we have some signposting to additional research that you may be interested in, as well as making the slides available to you later. So if you think, oh, there's a bit of theory there that I'd like to capture, or you don't have to write notes. Yeah, so I think most people are on mute and are here now. So without further ado, I'd like to thank NICAS, and I shall let today's speaker, Jamie Vardy, introduce himself. Many thanks. And oh, there's one more thing about annotations today. Sorry, I forgot to mention. If you go to the top of the screen, just a reminder, to the right of where you should see, you are viewing Jamie Vardy's screen. There should be a caption that says View Options. So if you can click on that and scroll down, sort of 2/3 of the way down, you should see the word Annotate. And if you click on that, Jamie will be asking you to do some annotations, whether that's putting a stamp or an arrow or drawing, etc. So hopefully, if you can find that annotation, then that will be helpful for us a bit later. Okay, many thanks, and over to Jamie.
Thank you, Chris. Right, so as Chris has introduced this already, so we're going to look at game theory for this webinar. So this is gamification within adventure sports. So before we start, as mentioned, those annotations are just going to help me understand where you guys are coming from in terms of your kind of expertise or your realm that you work in. So on this slide, it'd be really useful if you could start adding annotations into the boxes in which you predominantly work in. And then I kind of know who I'm talking to a little bit more. So I'll give a minute or so for people to do that, and then we'll kind of see where people are really. I like the circle. Okay, that's looking good so far. Okay, give another like 10 seconds or so. So looking like mountaineering is predominant, but although hill walking and climbing is close behind, not many water sports. That's probably expected for this one. Okay, sweet. Right, I'll move on. That really helps. Thank you for doing that. I like a lot of the different annotations as well. Right, so as we've said, this is coming from like a NICAS perspective as well as my own. So looking at that sort of thing and the contact details for those sort of things can be found there. And as the images kind of suggest, there's a lot of gamification within NICAS as well, which is why I think it's good to mention that as well. Yeah, but firstly, who am I? Because I imagine there's a fair few people that don't know who I am and where I'm coming from. So again, this is my perspective of what gamification is. And as you'll see, there's going to be quite a few different perspectives depending on who you ask. So as an overview for me, really, This is kind of my background and where I work in. As you can see, we've kind of got a little bit of a varied response from what you guys just did then. But this is kind of my perspective. And this is just to kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from. So like, obviously there's the climbing aspects that I predominantly work in, but also the more mainstream stuff. So like working in football, working as a personal trainer and gym instructor and stuff like that. So I kind of use the ideas from that sort of area, that more mainstream area, into climbing and vice versa as well. Seem to have, there we go. So overview of this webinar today. So we're going to look at what some evidence says, and then what I've seen anecdotally, a few little pitfalls and challenges that you might come across, and then we'll look at a few examples and we'll talk through those a little bit. So yeah, to start with, look at this evidence-based stuff. Just a brief review of this. There's obviously a lot more of this, but starting with this quote, I thought it was a decent one from Johnson, just to kind of show that it's how effective it can be in terms of acquiring, engaging and retaining individuals, which I think the retaining especially, all of them to be fair, but the retaining especially being quite important for our background and where we work, especially due to the extra benefits that we all know that people can get, young and old to be fair, from using outdoor activities type stuff or adventure sports. So even more so, it's like a double win in my view at least. So yeah, firstly then, gamification. So we've got a few ideas of what different perspectives are. So within the literature, you kind of see, using these ones here, that there are different perspectives within that, depending on where you're coming from. So some think it's a motivational theory and method of coaching for participants, and then others think about it as more of a consulting, taking up gains as that sort of medium to be able to consult, and then using the gamification to kind of use it within mechanisms, within like systemic mechanisms as well, in typically non-game situation, which I think we often rely on that adventure aspect of our sports without using a gamification, whereas we could enhance it further by the use of this. But yeah, just a few different perspectives on that. And then Lister chucking out another beautiful quote, just talking about attraction, engagement, and all that sort of things again, and just highlighting the fact that there's a lot of science behind gamification and it enhancing performance from athletic side of things, but as well as motivational for long-term progress through the sports that we do as well. So how it can work, I think this is an important aspect. If we don't know how it can work, then we'll not be able to apply it very well. And for me, I'm very much about applying these things. So this first one comes from like a more educational background, but using the correct terminology, I think it's going to be really important. So like in this example, instead of saying, let's find some information from the library, we're sending people on a quest to do that. And that means that it's going to be a lot more engaging just by changing that terminology essentially. Obviously you've got to use the appropriate terminology for your populations or what groups you're working through. I think if you said this to adults, maybe it'd be less engaging compared to if you're doing it to young kids. But this is just one example for that. And then, yeah, the interactive learning software. So the point that Lister makes here, I think a lot of people might be aware already of things like Fitbit and the use of like climbing Mont Blanc in maps of stairs in terms of height and stuff like that. And again, that's just a form of gamification, but on an online platform or a software-based platform as well. Lots of health and fitness apps that you've probably seen already that kind of do, and that's something we can implement as well. The role play games, so this is basically what NICAS is built on, the level 1 to 5, should I say. This is kind of being used in a formal setting, so like the military use leveling up in that formal setting, and how effective that is to keep people engaged over long periods of years and years and full careers. But also, like I said, in NICAS, that's basically the backbone of that in terms of going from level 1 to level 5 and keeping them engaged over a long period of time. And then the most important thing, in my eyes at least, is who are my participants. So rather than saying, how do you motivate participants in general, hard one, but we need to find out who they actually are. Because if we know that, then we're going to know what sort of character they are. And we don't have to just say, who are you, who are my participants? And it doesn't have to be a long-term thing, although obviously over time you get to know, if you have the same group, you get to know them a bit better. But just turning it into a game and asking them what character are they. So a few examples could be if they're a warrior, or if they're a wizard, or if they're a witch, or an archer. By asking them that type of character, especially if they're a younger participant, then that automatically or straight away gets you to know what type of person they view themselves as. And I think that's a really important point to make. And you can do that within that gamified world of what type of character are you. And then on top of that, we can better utilize or get them to understand how to better utilize the strengths and weaknesses of that particular character. So maybe an archer would be good at long range, for example, but not very good in short range sort of thing. So by using those examples, we can kind of get to understand the athlete or the participant in general, as well as the participant understanding themselves and why they're there as well. So that's the really important point for me, at least. Okay, moving it on. So what could be included? So these are some of the factors within the games that we need to include to make sure that we meet that that challenge or make sure it stays engaging. The only one I'd really say that's probably needed in most, if not all, different games is the far left one. So the clear goals and game parameters. I think that needs to be set, or at least the participants need to be aware of what they are and if they'll change. I'll talk about that a bit later on, but just making sure that people are aware, or those taking part are aware of what they are and if they may change or stay the same. The other ones, obviously you can include some of them or all of them depending on what the game and what your outcome is needed. And then the challenge to skill ratio, I think that's an important one, just to make sure that you're not going too far in terms of it's too much challenge and then they get disengaged. But then if it's not engaged, it's not challenging enough, then they're going to be quite bored. So trying to find the right level for that is important, and it's obviously going to vary depending on what groups you've got. So all important factors there to consider. And then this is basically, I'm not going to ask you to read all this slide, there's a lot of information on this slide, but this is basically a 5-factor 16-item scale in which we can use and include within when we're designing games or when we're adapting games. So this slide will be available after the webinars, as Crystal has already said, but using this sort of parameter, and you can kind of check, is my game ticking some of these or as many of these boxes as I possibly can. We'll come back to that in a second. But when developing these methods, so the game on the right hand side is something I'm going to go back to the next scale in a second, but these 2 points here I felt like was very important for us specifically. So trying to make sure that we are using the sound research that there is out there, and there's a lot of it, as I said, and making sure that just because we're in a kind of exploratory or a game-ish environment sometimes, I think we're quite, I don't know, for me at least, I've been quite lazy at times and thinking that's enough, when often we're not maximising what we could do. So in traditionally less game-based sports, for example, like the ball and team-based sort of stuff, these sort of games here can really impact on the long-term desire to keep going, and then the skill learning in the session as well. And often it's unconscious skill learning, which is kind of ideal, really. Thinking about the picture on the right, so I'm going back to this slide here. On that picture and that game, I've made sure that we've got at least some of these. So the relatedness and the fun factor within that game specifically, I think I ticked quite a few of those boxes personally, but then I'm not going to try and expect to tick every single box in terms of this factor model. So like I said, use as many as you can, but just understand that there are limitations how much you can get into a game for it to stay fun, obviously, as well. Okay, I'll move it on. So that was the end of the research aspect. This is just the stuff that I've seen from my perspective. The game on the right I kind of found quite interesting, with a little bit of obstacle course as well as doing that, and really good for co-engagement, as well as the fact that it's a fun game that they can kind of do, and then using that social aspect as well, because they have to work together sort of thing. You can see Alex here is quite enjoying himself. And then there's a couple other games, like some games can be specific to just training aspects. So all we did on the left hand side here was just get them to clap opposite hands and then change what we're doing to clap the same side, so both left and left, to make it harder, and then opposites just to keep them engaged, and then that social aspect as well. And then on the right side wasn't even anything to do with training or climbing specifically, but it was to get them to associate the climbing wall or the area when they come to climbing that it's a fun aspect. And I don't think you need to be totally focused on this needs to be skill learning for the sport that we're trying to do all the time, or training for this sport. I think sometimes you can just play a simple ball game that's just different and novel, and as you can see, these guys are having quite a lot of fun. And then we can adapt to games and stuff. So on this one, we changed from just using wrists, just using elbows, to just using knees, and we changed those parameters. As long as I said that before the game starts, that we're going to change some, then they're kind of aware of that. And then all of a sudden, I think at this moment here, we changed the rule slightly, and all of a sudden it totally changed the game and reinvigorated it as well. And this moves me on to what's called, or what I've called, Jedi coaching. So I think this elicits more effort than you'd get without using games. So something I learned from Udo Neumann, as a German coach, coaching without coaching. So without them realizing that they're actually being coached, and then that unconscious effort comes through massively. I'm sure you guys have been in games before where you've come out and you're sweating, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I was trying really hard then, and I didn't realize at the time. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at. So that success, finding an effort and making sure that we're producing that effort unconsciously, it's only going to be a good thing for those taking part, and then the skills or the training aspects that they get from it. And then on top of that, they're going to associate positive things with training or with the environment, stuff like that. I think a gamified culture is an important one to kind of highlight as well. So if they expect it to be a fun session, then that gamified culture has probably been cultivated. And then, like I said, that sustained high levels of effort over periods of time. So rather than just in the game or just in odd session, it'll be sustained effort over like months and years. And that's kind of what produces like really, really engaged participants over like not just when you're working with them, but then over time in terms of like after into their adulthood and kind of a lifelong ambition or desire to do these sorts of sports. And then them creating coaches themselves as well. So, and then last point on this slide being the malleable and adaptable dynamic environment. So that basically means that we need to be able to change up that environment. So on the previous slide, when I talked about that ball game, one of the changes was that the goals, the hoops that you might have seen on the left, they were one team's goal, and then I changed that straight away and being like their goals are flipped, and then that changes the game, reinvigorates it, and that means it's very adaptable. And I could only do that by using two different separate coloured hoops. If they were the same colour, it wouldn't have worked very well. And then on top of that, we can change like the size of the area that they're using. So by using cones on top of cones, I can just make it bigger or smaller, and then that'll change how intense the game is or how relaxed it is and how much space and time they've got. So making sure that each game is adaptable and you can change things very quickly within seconds, really, that keeps that engagement and makes sure that you don't have lulls within the games, which is quite an important point. I'll move on to pitfalls and challenges. So this is just a few little things, but I think these are important to highlight as well. And then the picture on the right, it's not necessarily a game so much, but again, I think it's an important one. So this is something I did just using like a more of a psychological aspect, but it turned a competition into a bit of a fun aspect. So obviously 110% magnesium carbonate would have been quite the friction or quite the chalk at least, special formula. And it just gave them these for adults as well. So gave them a bit of an edge, or just took their mind off the competition that they was in, because obviously a lot of them might be nervous and stuff. So by using super friction chalk, then it just turned that into a bit of a game, but not in the same sense as what I've described up to now. So it can take different forms. And then the environment. So we're looking at competitions, I was just saying. So within competitions, trying to make sure that they're accustomed to the competition in a fun way or a fun association with it. So things like team warm-ups or team warm-up games that I'm sure you've all seen before, during, like obviously at the start to set the tone, and then during breaks as well. So within the competitions I go to, there's a lot of breaks, a lot of lulls between those. So making sure that they're filled with something that's interesting or fun they're not eating or competing, then they're having fun, and that's within that environment, and that's really important. And then that's similar for practice and training sessions as well. So starting with a game, engaging them straight away, that means that we're going to be a lot more engaged in what you're going to say and what you're asking them to do for the rest of the session. Whether that's a training or practice session, whether that's a one-on-one or one-off, NCS session or something like that, straight away they're engaged, and they're going to have that positive view of you as a coach or as an instructor, and they're going to listen to what you say a lot more generally. And then on top of that, they're going to be wanting to come to that session a lot sooner. So basically dragging the parents to make sure they're not late because then they miss the game. And then obviously that has all positive aspects to that as well. And then areas, so using the specific areas. So that, an example I come across quite a lot is, especially a lot of the young kids, they are kind of scared of the training areas in climbing walls. So that means that they avoid them, and as much as the aspects that they don't need to be using yet, there are definitely things they can be using, and there's definitely things that they can benefit from using. And on top of that, as they get older, they might still keep that holding on to that fear factor of the training area. So just by doing the game within the training area, assuming that you've got space for it, and there's obviously not too many people there as it is, but doing it within the training area desensitizes it and makes them feel like they belong in that area. When I think that sense of belonging within any area that you kind of think is going to benefit them is only going to be a good thing. And then in a similar vein, the exposure, so like public pressure, the best example I think of straight away is at Nottingham, where I work sometimes. There's a wall there that's got the competition wall, which is right next to the cafe, right next to the front desk where all the staff work, and right next to where people are coming in, so waiting to pay. That is quite an intimidating area for a lot of people because it's a competition wall in the first place. It's right next to people in terms of cafe people paying, and then the depot staff, they're going to be looking in a sense and be able to see you climbing, so people can feel a bit cautious about that. But by playing a game in that environment again, that's going to desensitize that area and make it a lot less scary. And on top of that, when they're doing the game, they're not focused on what everything else is going off around them. They're so focused on the game, if it's a good game, then they'll just totally forget what's around them, and that's going to be obviously positive in terms of being able to use that area long term. Individual variation. So this is an important aspect when you're thinking about your participants specifically. So as we know, we're not able to get like 100% engagement all of the time. It's basically impossible near enough. I'm not yet to meet someone that can do that anyway. But we're going to try and get as best we can, really. So implementing the pre-discussed rule changes. So I think that's going to be important. Just because when we changing the rules suddenly and they don't expect it, as mentioned before, the rules are, it's going to be a bit of a shock. It's like, oh, you're moving the goalpost sort of thing, but then not implement something can make the games just get stale. So making sure that you can implement it at the right time is going to be quite important, but that they know about it as well. And then the shared advantages one. So you'll see some people that disengage from the game and other people that are absolutely loving it. And if it's going well for the majority, you don't necessarily want to close it yet. But by changing those parameters or changing the rules a little bit, so if someone's left-handed and they feel like it's a very right-handed based advantage game, then just change it so you can be like, right, left hand from whatever, like maybe a throwing arm or something like that. And all of a sudden that person that wasn't engaged much before then becomes a lot more engaged because they feel like they're good at it. There's loads of different ways you can do that, but that means that we can make sure that all participants feel engaged or feel it's a fun aspect at some points of the game. So they don't have to all feel like they're all engaged 100% of the time, as I said, but at least some aspects or some points of the game, everyone feels like they are having fun and not left out, I suppose. And then ending the game with the desired continuity still apparent. So if we end the game too soon, then obviously they're not going to achieve what they wanted to achieve or the outcome that you're trying to do. But if you let it carry on, that when you play that game again, it'll not have the same desire to put the same amounts of efforts in. So if we can it's important to recognise when to end it with just whether we want to carry on just a little bit more, and then we can close it there. So that means when they can come back to it, they actually really start to do it again. It didn't get boring in a sense. And then understanding participants. So this goes back to what we talked about understanding participants and different ones. So there's a few ones that I think we could use within our realm or within our sports on these. So just to understand like what maybe an achiever might be. So that means someone that's going to be strictly for the trophy or spend lots of time on the craft of what they're trying to achieve. Not so much focused on their opponents, but just focused on them achieving like self-improvement sort of thing. And then adventurers, so we're looking at people that they seek the unknown, they discover for themselves, and that's something that I know for me at least that was kind of relates to me when I was young, and we see a lot within adventure sports obviously. But there are those socialites, so those that are just kind of there for the group, the group interactions and the friends that they make, a bit of a team player, and just want to be part of that kind of that group that achieves whatever they're trying to do, and there for the social aspects of things, which I'm sure we've all seen before. And then the competitor, the one that will do whatever it takes to win. And unlike achievers, which they can be confused with, that competitor does care about what the rival or what their opponent is doing, and they will try and use that as motivation to get better themselves rather than just thinking about how to improve within themselves. So it's more of an extrovert like trait in essence. These are just a few examples. I'm sure there are more, and trying to categorize people is quite challenging or not always useful, but just understanding what people might be like and being able to do that, then you can kind of best tailor your games towards those types of people. And then, as I said, we can adapt a little bit as well. And then a few examples. So I've got a quick video so you can stop hearing me talk so much. So this is a really good game that Dan here introduced. Nice cut, so Alex there. And again, like we talked about before, we did this next to the training board. So something that these boys specifically can start looking at using gradually because of their age and ability. But we're trying to desensitize that training area. Behind them, there's a campus board. So just the training area in general, trying to desensitize and by using this game. And again, not necessarily skill-based for climbing, but it is agility, it is movement, and it is making sure that they're overall athletes, but more so desensitizing towards that training area aspect as well. And then just a few examples really. So talk about Tindeck. I don't know if you've heard of those yet, but it's just a loading force cell to show you how much you can pull basically. And we set up a leaderboard with some junior GB athletes, and obviously the type of people that they might be, understanding who they are a little bit more. We set up a leaderboard, and then that got them engaged, and then we talked about the benefits and drawbacks of it. But by getting engaged, that means they listened a lot more and took it on board a lot more. But the leaderboard really was more effective than I even thought it was going to be fair. And then the water plank, I'm going to show you again in a bit in the next few slides. So it's just like an intra-competition within the group. It's essentially putting a beaker of water on your back whilst planking. Totally changes a boring plank into exciting, as well as the fact that we're going to get loads of core engagement and loads of understanding, and then ask them to touch the shoulder or touch the head or touch the nose, touch the foot, which is quite hard. And then that means it's going to be a lot more interesting. And then they've got a consequence as well of a bit of cold water on your back. Something you can do at just about any wall or any indoor facility really. The assault courses was really good one as a warm-up. So this, I did it at a competition, I've done it a few times as well. So just in a time trial, it's like a social game where they're trying to do time trials as a team, or you can do individuals if you want to, depending on the people that you've got. But just nothing to do with like the skills that you're going to be using, but is to do with having fun within the environment. And then we had a handstand challenge of the month, which is a medium to long term. So this was like, how long can you handstand for, essentially from nothing to how long for. And then that was an academy challenge that was, but it was more the medium term thing versus just within that moment or within the 5 minutes or whatever. A couple of pictures, a few games we did. Obviously the blind thing weren't really skill based again. It was just more of a route reading thing to for this climber to remember. But as you can see, having lots of fun doing that. This was part of one of the time trials that we did, and then they kind of took on board just rotating around the table, trying to climb on the table, which again I'm sure some of you guys have seen before, but something that you can see that even the older guys were quite interested in, and something that they sparked off, to be fair. Just it was part of the time trial, but then they just wanted to do this afterwards because they found it so fun, and I kind of encouraged that. This was just a clipping game, so they had to chase each other a little bit, and then we had another not off the wall but in the climbing area warm up. This was to go through each other, which again, simple game, but having a great time within the environment that we're in. This was about core activation, so trying to place the bottle as far as you can, but only planting one hand past the rope line. Again, a bit of a competitor sort of one. So when these guys are trying to compete against each other a little bit, that's when this would be a really good game to do. Whereas say maybe a socialite won't be as interested in this one. And then we've got the beaker game on the left, which I talked about. Obviously did that with adults, so they enjoyed that as well. Just making sure that when they do the movements that they don't chip the water on them, and when they do, it's quite entertaining for me at least. The one in the middle is just, we've seen the ab wheels, I'm sure, and then just doing a little bit of assault course through makes it way more interesting than just going up and down all the time. And then again on the right, it's just another type of game that we did within the climbing centre that made it so it was more interesting, and we did this as a warm-up, which you can probably tell they weren't quite ready. But there's loads of, I'm sure you've seen loads of games, loads of sources of inspiration, and trying to encourage that creativity for you guys and for everyone else, as well as the kids as well, asking what they think might be a good game. So I'm sure they've got loads as well that I've come across from them telling us that you can get them off the kids, you get them off the adults, or even just get them off Instagram from this guy that I found. So loads of ideas and ones that you can come up with. So definitely encourage that as much as we can. And then just to close, I think making sure that it's voluntary participation. If we're forcing them into a game, they're not going to be engaged straight away, and that's just going to ruin the whole aspect of it. And then ultimately, it's how your group perceives you. So if you're not a fun-loving character that wants to be there, then they're going to pick up on that. So if you want to be there and you want to have fun with them, and that with aspect being important, then that's where it's going to be a lot more successful. You see Freddie here having a great time messing around with some brushes, which I think is an important aspect to consider. I'm just going to stick these up just as an overview. Again, we said at the start that we can kind of see all these different aspects, but anything that you can kind of pick up on there that makes it so it's a lot easier for you guys to include gamification within your session, which I'm sure you already do to a certain extent, but maybe enhance it a little bit further. And then a few references, we can kind of find that as well. And then, yeah, asking any questions if we can. That's me.
Jamie, could you just go back to the previous slide, please, with the questions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, Jamie. Obviously, there may be a number of questions, so if you'd like to either put them in the chat or unmute and put a hand up, then obviously Jamie is here, and we can try and respond, or have a discussion about the use of games or that and how people find that. So
Got any good ones, Chris?
Well, obviously, Alex saying thank you on the chat, which is nice.
I realised I talked quite a bit then, but it's kind of, I'm very good at talking over and spending too much time on these things, so trying to whiz through it. Apologise if it was that, too much talking there.
Jamie, can I ask you a question about your work with adults and how you found adult engagement with the play aspect?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So as you saw, like the beaker game was, I started that with the kids and then thought, actually, this is quite fun, and did it with adults, and they found it just as fun, if not more so, to be honest, especially when competing against themselves a little bit. But I think adults are definitely, me included, a lot more engaged with games than I think we originally understand them to be. There's certain ones that, as long as we understand what we're doing, there's certain ones that they might be less engaged with and more engaged with, but I think the principles generally relate to adults nearly as much as they do kids. It's just a case of whether it's something that they feel like they can achieve. So like climbing the table, maybe some adults don't feel like they could do that, and then that would turn them off in terms of their engagement. But certain ones like blindfolding or the core ones, especially a training one, that might be more appropriate for adults. just because they maybe see training as more of a thing that adults do versus more the things that kids do. So keeping that more interesting might be a useful way to use gamification within training for adults especially.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions that have come through on the chat, Jamie. So a couple of really good questions, actually. Iona's saying, can you recommend any particular people online or signpost to other places for sort of out-of-the-box inspirational games?
I think the best thing that I've done in terms of that, I couldn't think of anyone off the top of my head, but I've got so many people saved on my social media and stuff like that I go back to all the time. There's just a big long list of stuff. So I'd say maybe just look outside of our sport so much, because I've learned so many things that that's so simple and so easy to apply to what we do. So looking at things like, because the mainstream sports have so many more coaches than maybe we do, there are going to be so more different ideas. So looking at Twitter and things like that within football, because that's what I grew up with before I knew about climbing, and within like rugby or whatever other mainstream sports are, there's just so many ideas out there we can just adapt and change. So I think pinpointing certain ones would be quite hard, I think, at least off the top of my head. But I could definitely add that to a list of like anything we do in terms of posting this online and kind of go through what I've already saved and add that to a list on here.
Yeah, okay, we'll make sure we do that. Thank you.
Look outside the sports that we do, and there's just so much.
There's another question from Mike Basley. Socially distanced games, Jamie, top tips? I'm sure everybody's keen to know these.
Yeah. So I think, I suppose there's the games that, like this one here, could technically be a social distance game, because these had their own bottle as their own marker as well, so that kind of works. And then I suppose all the training ones, in essence, are really good ones. I suppose, again, off the top of my head, I'd struggle to think of a game specifically that's social distance, because I've not actually implemented it yet, because I've not been in a wall for so long to be able to start designing those things. But I think a lot of these things can be social distance as well. Like even this one, as long as you've got a fixed surface, you can basically do it. Hard to think of one off the top of my head in that sense, apart from like the ones that are already on here, like that.
Okay, thank you. And maybe again, that's something, because as time goes by and as we will gradually potentially go back to work a bit more, we can maybe add some resources as we come across them, if that will be helpful. I'm sure that will be helpful for people.
Yeah, for sure.
So there were some great comments again in the chat. Obviously, Mehmet making the point that for certainly some people not mentioning the word or the term game, but making sure, it is fun. So that's all about the presentation. And Lorcan is saying, do you find it's a case of trial and error with, what works better with different age groups, Jamie?
Yeah, I think trial and error is a really important aspect to it. Yeah, I think that is for most things. But I think you start getting a gauge of what your understand your athletes. That's why I talked about that being such an important thing. You can kind of get a gauge of what game might work best with another. And if it didn't work, the same game didn't work with a certain group once, just by changing it slightly can make all the difference. So making, I think this game particularly, let's go up here, these girls didn't enjoy it as much as the older guys. Even though they can say they enjoyed it, they waned off. I think this only lasted like 10 minutes. Whereas with the older guys that are a bit more competitive, just within those that I worked with at the time at least, they lasted, I think they made this game last about 25, 30 minutes before I was like, okay, we need to move on now, because we need to get other things done. So just understanding who you're working with is such a key part to that. But making sure, just slight little tweaks can make a massive difference to each game. So just because it didn't work once, don't think that game's rubbish. Just try and tweak it, and maybe that makes all the difference.
Okay, thank you. We have I'm going to read Mark's question. When are Leicester playing again, and will you be in the starting 11?
I've not been doing any training, Mark, I'm afraid. So I reckon I'll be out.
Okay, so nice, good question from Sharon. Favourite games for students lacking in motivation and engagement, Jamie?
Students as in university students?
Yeah, but yeah.
So this is something I've done with Derby Uni, the students that I work with, the books team there. Again, they're going to be quite varied, but making sure, I think that was more of a social thing. So getting some sort of social games together was more effective than any sort of competitive type games like this one, or any sort of training type games as well. So I think we'd had a very simple warm-up game where we just got them to do shuttle runs, but then jump on each other's back to finish, and just very simple things like that really worked, because then that was more of a social thing. And then when I kind of go back to this slide, that relatedness aspect of this is what's kind of ticked their boxes a lot more. So understanding that a little bit. So any sort of social games really worked. And then this was for university students, as you can probably see on the picture, to be fair. So in the non-typical sense of a game, just implementing little things like that within the session that you're doing anyway, turns the session into a bit of a game aspect of it. So you can literally just feed them in without them really noticing, and all of a sudden they feel like they're having a play in essence, rather than being a competition in this case, or in a session with students in that case as well.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Another question from Ewan, who's interested in the use of gamification ideas to structure learning plans. And he's saying he's wondering if you had more reflection on the NICAS structure. Good question here, in terms of levelling up.
So this is something that NICAS and me and the rest of the CDT team have been working on over the last 4 or 5 months, and a massive change in how that works. The levels so much won't change in terms of going through the levels, but how to get through them will change a little bit. So making sure that the levels aren't split so clinically as they are at the minute. We're going to have drip feeding, like at level 5, for example, we might have loads of information on performance profiling, whereas at level 4 there might be 1 or 2 instances of it, and then at level 3 there might be an introduction to it. So being able to include bits of the highest levels within each one, but just like tiny bits of each bit, and then as you get through the levels, it just becomes more and more advanced in that sense. So I think, yeah, using that system, or using that integration of levels versus just clinical set levels, it's what we're working on. I think that seems to be what's going to work best, at least from our perspective anyway. Okay,
thank you, Jamie. Don't know if anybody else would like to pose any questions on the chat or raise a hand to ask a question. There've been some great questions so far, so thank you. In terms of resources, Jamie, we've had some questions about that, and I'm sure that for the different age levels, it'd be great to have collections of resources available for people. So maybe between Mountain Training and NICAS, we can collate some resources. Do people think that would be helpful? Thumbs up, or what do we think? Or there might be people out there who have a host of resources. Yeah, okay, we'll try our best to collate some, and we'll add them, whatever we've collated, onto this as links when we publish this webinar. I think it's an ongoing process, especially with the socially distanced games that everyone will be keen to utilise.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Someone waving.
So, Jamie, I've got to ask, what next for you? You're still finishing off your masters, is that right?
Yeah. So I've got till July 24th to get that dissertation done, which is a scary thought. And then I suppose it's being able to use that within, for me, within climbing and performance coaching specifically, but within all the stuff that we do within NICAS as well. So I suppose that's what I'm focused on next, and maybe. As you can probably tell within this presentation, I'm quite keen on research and that sort of thing. So some sort of a research review for climbing specifically. So within the sports psychology, which I'm looking at, this is what I'm doing my masters on, and some sport physiology research. That's something that's kind of on the horizon for me at least. So look out for that, guys, and hopefully we can kind of learn from that a little bit more, and then apply this sort of research or psychology research or the other stuff long term and kind of pick up all information from that as well.
Jamie, we have somebody who would like to ask a question on the video. So if I can just ask them to, they should be able to unmute.
Okay.
It was McLean. So if you would like to do that, that would be good. I think you should have the capacity to unmute yourself. So I'm just trying to search on the...
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear Mehmet.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question, which was, so far with this chat, a lot of what we've been discussing is how to use games and how that helps with the social cohesion of your groups and how you can sort of get them more familiar with the environment.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of gamification is using games to introduce skills.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips for coming up with, in a more generic sense, coming up with games for teaching specific skills? I mean, I try to do that sometimes, but sometimes I struggle to come up with good games. So if you are thinking of a game for a skill, what sort of factors do you consider?
I think this is something I battled with for quite a while, and sometimes I've gone from very strict, like we're going to practice this and we're very focused on that and kind of removing that game aspect. And then other times I've gone way too far and turned it into a game that totally removes the fact that we're actually practicing skill, which, depending on what context you're doing, it's not a bad or a good thing. But if you're looking at doing skill-based stuff specifically, I think simple games like what the Paul Smith book did, but advancing that a little bit more. So making sure that there are very set parameters for what you're trying to do, I think is an important key element for that. But if we're setting parameters that are quite strict, I think when we deliver that, or when we explain that to the participants, I think it needs to be important. It's important to make sure that they don't feel like it's strict. It's not an easy thing to do, don't get me wrong, but I think strict parameters for the game ensure that we can kind of make sure we're focused on that skill aspect. Obviously, it depends on the skill that we're trying to do, and that's very variable. But I'd say that's probably a key part of it. And then making sure that you've got different levels or different either side steps or forward or backward steps that you can do depending on the skill level of that participant. Because then that means that if they're struggling with it, then you can bring it back. If it's just that they're doing the same one over time, you can just take a side step and just do something slightly different with it. And then within the environment as well, I know we said about environment, but just changing from one side of if it's a climbing wall, for example, changing from one side of the climbing wall to another side of the climbing wall. You don't have to change anything else. It's just in a slightly different space.
Yeah.
So I'd say there are three aspects that come to mind straight away, really.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Other questions, comments, or observations? Okay, well, Jamie, any other thoughts from you?
No, I think, well, maybe just, like I said, about collecting all that information, all the different games. Like, I can't produce the best games, and I don't think any one person can, but maybe a collection of like as many people as possible can then enhance that ability to do game. And I don't mean just like creating a whole new game, but just a slight adaptation to like the question is answered. We can maybe change the games in slightly different tweaks within that same bubble, I suppose. So yeah, it's definitely a collective thing that's going to make it better. We look at all research we want, but I think the more people that interact with each other and learn off each other in terms of different games, the better it's going to be. And I think that'll always trump research in that sense. At least applying it anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. There might be another question on the chat. Yeah, lots of food for thought. Yeah, that's right, indeed. Yeah, regardless of age group or the skills that we want to develop. Yeah, it's important factors. Okay, well, I'll just wait another minute in case anybody else thinks, oh, I've got another question.
I think the slide that was very text heavy, I think that was an important one. I know I said it's very text heavy, so I want to include it just because it's important. But like I said, if you just tick them off as you design a game or as you review or reflect on the game that you've done, then it kind of gives you a bit more awareness of how it's helped and how it might help a different population as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Okay, well, if we can go on to the thank you slide, that'd be great, Jamie. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. Hope it's been, you know, prompted some ideas and thoughts, and as I say, we will try our best to collate all the resources for you. Do send us in feedback, really helpful for us. And as I say, we'll make the sessions as useful for you as possible. Jamie, can you just go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And the final slide is just a reminder of our session next week that you may or may not be aware of, but we will welcome Neil Anderson from the Institute of Outdoor Learning. I'm sure many of you know Neil, and he will be presenting information about, really important for everyone, about our mental health and his take on some helpful aspects and sharing a model with us. So do sign up for that if that's of interest to you, and thank you very much. So again, huge thanks to Jamie for prompting some interesting thoughts and perspectives on a really important subject, gamification. Hopefully we can all motivate even more. And yeah, apart from that, enjoy your day wherever you are, and many thanks for your time. Okay, folks, if that's everything, I shall end the session. And if you have any more questions, then just send them in. Okay, many thanks, folks.
Thank you, guys. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, cheers, guys.